You're listening to the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. I'm Andrew Menzel, and now I'm joined by former Australian captain and legend of the game, Greg Chappell. Greg, how are you?
Very good, Andrew. Yourself?
Yeah, doing really well. And I know you've got the big Sports Stars Sleepout coming up for the Chappell Foundation on October 16th. A lot of well-known sports figures due to sleep out on the SCG. Peter Neville, the former umpire, Simon Towfall, Bronte Campbell, the athlete. Must be really exciting for the foundation.
Yes, it is. This is the 5th edition of the Sports Stars Sleepout, and we're really looking forward to it each year. Normally we have it in August when it's Homelessness Week, but because of situations out of our control, we've had to delay it a little bit this year, but that's all very good. It'll be better for those who are sleeping out because it'll be a lot warmer at the end of October than it is in the first week of August.
Yeah, absolutely. Might be a bit wet, though, if the rain hangs
Could
around.
well be.
Tell me, Greg, it's obviously, at the moment, rising cost of living and everything, so that, the Chappell Foundation is as important as ever. I mean, how's it been going since we last spoke?
Yeah, it's been going pretty well. The last couple of years has been a challenge for everybody in all sorts of ways, but not least of all for fundraising, with people locked down and unable to travel and all of those things. But somehow we've managed to keep most of our events going. Our job, apart from raising money for the 7 charities that we support, it's very much about the awareness of the issue in Australia of youth homelessness. And unfortunately, the last couple of years has only exacerbated the need of the services that the charities that we support provide. They're all telling us that they're 100% capacity. They're getting demands on their services that like never before. So every dollar we can raise does make a big difference. And being a fully volunteer charity, pretty much every dollar that we raise goes to the cause.
Yeah, it's an incredible charity. I've been to some of the dinners and events. What's the best way people can help?
Well, the best way they can help is obviously by donating, and they can go to the Chappell Foundation website and do that. On the website now and coming up over the next week or so will be the list of names of the sports stars that will be sleeping out, and the opportunity will be there for anyone who wants to support a particular athlete in their fundraising. They can go to their dedicated page and donate some money in the name of their athlete to the cause.
Yeah, I had a look at that before our recording, and at the moment, Peter Neville, former Australian wicketkeeper, is leading that little table. But you jump on there and donate. It's a great cause. I know you had Pat Cummins at the Chappell Foundation dinner this year. You always get, the highest and best speakers for these dinners. How was he?
He was brilliant, as you could imagine. Very impressive young man at the best of times, but his composure, his selflessness, his humbleness came through very, very obviously on the night. Tracy interviewed him on the night, and he spoke very well. We had a special little tour of the Australian dressing room before the dinner for our VIP guests, and Pat stood up there and told stories about some of his memories in the dressing room, who sits where, and some of their each of the players' own peculiarities about how they like to keep their space. And it was really interesting. And having spent a number of years myself in that dressing room and shared a few of those stories myself of our time, things are very different. But Pat was a great credit to himself. I mean, he'd just come back from touring. He was supposedly on his honeymoon and broke his honeymoon to come to speak at the dinner and to fulfil the obligation. So we were most grateful because we had a record turnout. The Sydney Cricket Ground itself is a great venue for anything, but to have Pat Cummins, the current Australian captain, there really brought a big crowd. We had nearly 500 people at the dinner, and raised a goodly sum for the support of youth homelessness.
You said you went into the dressing room. When you were playing, Greg, were you one of those players that kept everything neat and tidy, or was there just a big pile of equipment outside your locker?
Well, we didn't carry as many cricket bats as the current players do. Our bats tended to last a little bit longer. At best, I would ever have 2 bats in my sort of kit bag. Some of these guys might have 6 to 10 bats, so they take up a lot more space than ours used to. I was reasonably tidy, but I can't say that I was scrupulously tidy. I think there was always a bit of stuff hanging out of my cricket bag at the best of times, and by the end of a test match, you had stuff all over the place. And when we packed up, we had to check and make sure that we were picking and packing our own gear and not somebody else's.
Any players you remember being notoriously messy?
Ashley Mallett was pretty notorious. His area was always pretty untidy, and Doug Walters always made a point of sitting alongside wherever rowdy Ashley Mallett would set up, and he would contribute to the untidiness. He'd make sure that if Ashley didn't leave it out of his bag, he would pull it out of the bag. And he loved to do things like turn Ashley's bowling boots upside down so that he would be treading on the spikes when he came back from the shower, or he'd throw chewing gum on the floor in front of his seat so that he'd be standing on chewing gum. So that didn't help matters very much. Richie Robinson, I think, was probably the tidiest cricketer that I ever played with or against. He had a plastic bag for every item of his cricket kit, and he was most unhappy if any of it was tampered with or somebody made a mess of his area.
Incredible. I think there's a few like that at the moment that take a lot of pride in all their gear. Pat Cummins at the dinner, I guess he would have spoken a little bit about his sort of early taste of Test captaincy. I mean, I guess how have you sort of viewed his beginning?
Oh, look, he's been most impressive. He's had a lot of support on the field, obviously. I think it is a big task for a fast bowler to do the job because physically they're much more taxed than someone who's not bowling fast is in the field. And so I think he's lent very heavily on his senior players in Steve Smith and David Warner and others. There's always plenty of people there to give him support, and there's obviously a lot of support off the field as well. So I think, he's taken to the job well. I think he's been surprised that, the fact that it has been made a lot easier by the support that he's had on the field and off the field. I think his strategies and tactics have been pretty good. There's always a worry about a fast bowling captain that he might underbowl himself, but I think he's either that or overbowl himself. But I think Pat's kept the balance pretty well, and he's bowled when he's needed to bowl, and he's had others bowl when they should be bowling. So it doesn't necessarily get any easier. There's a big year coming up. In fact, a big couple of years of cricket. So he's going to have his work cut out for him in the next couple of years.
I thought the tour of Pakistan was a great test for him because they were in the field for so long, and if there were concerns about a fast bowler being captain, that would have sort of come to the surface. But he held it together, and I think he's very sensible because he doesn't want to take on too much. You said he doesn't really want the 50-over captaincy because he doesn't want to burn out.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty smart decision, to be honest. You do need some breaks. And I think if you're just going from one to another and then you throw in the IPL and things like that, it becomes very demanding. Now, he's a very smart young man. He's got his head screwed on pretty well. He's got his feet firmly on the ground. There's not a lot of hubris about him. Very pragmatic individual. And I think, it comes through in his captaincy. He's very conscious of it being a team effort and not just one person.
Yeah, agree. We were discussing on this podcast a couple of weeks ago whether Steve Smith might be a candidate to take over the 50-over captaincy because he's an outstanding player in that format. I'm just wondering if you sort of think back to when he was captain of the Australian side, what you thought of him as a tactician.
Oh, Steve's pretty good. I mean, his understanding of the game is extremely deep. He's got a really good feel for it. I think he's a very intense individual, and having that extra workload. The worry from my point of view is that you lose a little bit of something with his batting if he becomes captain again. I think the selectors will think very long and hard about whether they move in that direction. It will just depend on whether they think they have other options, and I'm sure they do. I think David Warner would be a good choice if he was allowed to do it. Mitch Marsh is another one that would be considered. Maxwell has captained Big Bash teams and so on.
What about Carey?
So there's a fair bit of experience there.
What do you think of Alex Carey? Because he's vice captain, they might just elevate him.
Yeah, I have to be honest. I haven't seen a lot of Alex in a captaincy role. From a strategic and decision-making point of view. And again, it's a little bit like fast bowlers. Having a wicketkeeper as captain, makes it very challenging. Tim Payne obviously did it with the Australian team for a few years and did it with quite a bit of success. So it's not like they're short of candidates. So it'll be very interesting to see which way they go.
I agree. We'll see. Hopefully we'll hear something pretty soon. All the headlines recently has been about Cameron Green's T20 form. Now, I know you caught him pretty early and could see a lot of potential. He's really exploded in India in those T20 games. I mean, what have you made of his sort of T20 cricket?
Oh, look, he can play any format. He's a very exciting talent. I saw him as a teenager, and I thought then that he was a true all-rounder in the sense that he could find a place in the team as a batsman or as a bowler. And the danger that I saw was that people would recognise instantly his bowling because he's 6'7", bowls at 140 clicks. It's pretty impressive and very demanding. But I could also see in him that he was a very exciting batsman, potentially, an outstanding batsman in all forms of the game, and a little bit like Pat Cummins. Pat was our best batsman in the under-19s in 2012 when he was going through the program, as well as our best bowler, and sadly he broke down a couple of years later, and he lost about 18 months development in his batting, and he hasn't quite developed into the batsman that he could well have been. I didn't want to see the same thing happen to Green because I think he's an even more outstanding batsman than he is an outstanding bowler. And he could be anything. I mean, he could be our next superstar as a batsman and as an all-rounder. So it's a tough balancing act to, again, manage all of the demands on him as a young person. Managing his bowling particularly will be a real challenge for everyone. So I just hope they don't overdo it. He would be outstanding in any format, and the temptation would be to play him in all formats. But I think they've got to make sure that they manage his workload because I think also potentially a leader in the future.
Yeah, I agree with him having huge potential. What I like about him as well is he seems quite level-headed. He doesn't seem to... Emotionally, he seems quite measured, which will only stand him in good stead as his international career continues.
Yeah, I think so. It's very easy when a young player breaks in and people start to get excited about his talent. The danger is that they start believing their own press, but you're exactly right. He's a very level-headed young fellow, and I think he's smart enough to realise, much like Pat Cummins, that talent is one thing, form is another thing. It can be a rather fleeting thing if you're not careful, if you get too carried away and too far ahead of yourself. But I don't think that Cameron is going to be one of those people. I think he really understands where he's at, what his potential is, but that he has to keep his mind on the job.
I mean, from a financial point of view, he should definitely go to the IPL next year. But from a cricketing point of view, sort of where do you sit on that for his development?
Yeah, look, I would be worried that if he tries to take on too much too soon, he could burn himself out. And the cash in hand in the short term might be attractive, but it might cost him a lot more in the long run if he burnt out or broke down and couldn't play cricket for 18 months or so. It could have an impact, but it must be very hard if someone starts offering you a couple of $1 million to play cricket for 6 weeks, bowl 4 over spells, and bat for a few overs. It would be very attractive and hard to turn away from. It wouldn't surprise me if he decided just to put it on hold for a couple of years and just focus on developing his long form game and his 50 over game, and not take the easy bucks straight away.
I think there could be some benefit to him going and mixing with all those superstars for a little while and just feeding off them.
No doubt about that. I think the IPL has been pretty good for a lot of people in that regard, that they all of a sudden realised that the people that they were sitting in the opposite dressing room to aren't actually bad blokes, and I think it's really been good for the game worldwide that there has been that mix and match, and they have had the chance to mix with players from different countries, different cultures, different languages, and realise that deep down they're all the same. They just love the game and they want to get out there and compete and do as well as they can. Yeah, no doubt it would be good for his development in all ways, but playing cricket, any sport, 12 months of the year is pretty challenging. So it'll be very interesting just to see how he manages himself over the next few years.
Yeah, I can't wait to see him play more and more, and maybe he takes a bit more of this aggressive intent into his test game.
Yeah, I think that's all it takes. He probably in his early test matches, he was more worried about getting out than scoring runs. And I think once he realises that, in fact, the more aggressive he is and the more he looks to score runs, the safer he'll be, in the sense that when you're looking to score runs, you're moving, you get into better positions, so you survive better anyway, and you take all the scoring opportunities. So, I won't be surprised to see him absolutely take off in Test cricket in the very near future as a batsman. He'll take attacks apart. He's, without looking to hit the ball hard, he hits the ball hard. He hits gaps, so he hits boundaries. He clears boundaries. He can score runs quickly, and if he's in form and on song, he'd be very hard to bowl to.
Yeah, most certainly. Another hot button issue at the moment is the changes to the man-cad law. So it's now in a run out, and it's been legitimised to another form of dismissal. And we saw in a women's match an Indian player run out an English player, and there was a bit of a furore. I guess when you were playing and now, what do you think about batters sort of taking ground at the non-striker's end?
Yeah, it is a hot button. I don't quite understand why it's such a hot button, and why the bowler is always the one that is looked at as the villain.
Agree.
If a batsman is prepared to leave their crease before the ball is bowled, they take the risk, and they're the ones that are at fault. I don't think this should be something that's put on the bowlers only. Now, I didn't see the situation in the India-England women's game live, but I saw a little bit of footage leading up to the incident, and the woman who was run out had been leaving the crease early for a few overs, and there were plenty of people that talked about lack of sportsmanship from the Indian team in claiming the wicket, but the lack of sportsmanship is equally on the other side by the batter who leaves the crease early. They are definitely taking an advantage. I've never quite understood that there is so much stigma on the bowler in an incident like that, when in fact most of the blame should be laid at the batsman's feet.
Yeah, I think the English seem to get more upset about this than any other nation.
I saw a fair bit of criticism from all around the world, and rarely in those situations, not just this one, but talking about historic incidents, the focus is always on the bowler doing the wrong thing. If the batsman wasn't leaving the crease early, there would be no opportunity for the bowler to run the non-striker out. So let's put the blame where it belongs, back on the person with the bat in their hand.
Yeah.
If they don't leave the crease early, it can't happen.
Yes, spot
so
on.
Let's get back to the real root of the problem. It's with the batsman. And if they do the right thing, then there will never be a problem. So let's put the blame where it firmly belongs.
Yeah, great. Now, I've just got a few more questions and a couple from the listeners before I let you go. This year, it's been a really sad year for Australian cricket with the loss of some, great players. I know, your former teammate Rod Marsh, Shane Warne, Andrew Simons, players that you would have been involved with quite closely. And, my condolences to you. I just wonder, in the wake of that, Ricky Ponting organised a get-together for his sort of teammates. How closely, do your former teammates look out for each other?
Yeah, I think particularly the ones who played, for a long time together have always sort of had that bond and looked out for each other. We're sort of 40 years past our playing days now, so obviously everyone's got on with their life, and we all live in different parts of the country. But I still keep in touch with, and a lot of the guys that I played cricket with and against keep in touch with each other. And I've probably had 3 phone conversations today with people that I used to play cricket with for one reason or another. Just some weeks it's you have a lot of conversations, and then it might go for weeks without any contact with anyone you played with. But when you do get together, it's almost as though you haven't been apart. And I think that's terrific, because over the years we shared a lot of experiences, and some of them were good, some were bad. We didn't everything, but often the setbacks were probably as good a learning opportunity as the good days. In fact, better on most occasions. So I think when you've spent so much time and effort in a group aiming for a goal, sometimes succeeding, sometimes not, you get to find out a lot about each other, and you build some really strong relationships.
Yeah, and I think that's what Adam Gilchrist was saying, that he felt that it was important for that era to make sure they come together and reminisce. And it's easy, as you say, you get busy and you drift apart, and then all of a sudden years go by.
Yeah, it happens. Everyone has families, and you're busy with your own family, so it's nice. I was lucky that I stayed in cricket in one form or another, coaching, commentating, administrating and so on. So I got to travel quite a bit during the summer, which over the years has allowed me to keep in contact with a lot of those guys from interstate and overseas. So that's been very helpful.
Good to hear. All right, now a couple of listeners have sent in questions to end our interview. Now Mitchell Hall has asked you, will the West Indies ever be a powerhouse again?
I don't think you could say no, because talent is not their problem. They've always produced some pretty talented cricketers, athletic cricketers, and they still do. They happen to have a really purple patch there from sort of the late 70s through to the early 2000s, where they just seem to keep producing great fast bowlers, great batsmen, great fielders, and they were world champions for a lot of that time. I think it'll be hard to see them get back to that stage. The infrastructure in the West Indies has sort of deteriorated a bit over the years. They don't have a lot of money. It's a pretty poor region, so there's not a lot of finance for the game. And the guys tend to ply their trade around the world in T20 tournaments and so on, because they have to if they're going to make money, because there's not a lot of it in sponsorship and television rights and so on in the region. And, because of the poverty generally, now there's not jobs, there's not opportunities for people, big migration away from the region in the later part of last century and the early part of this century, which, has taken a lot of talent away as well. So the likelihood of them getting back to the stage where they were in the late part of last century and the early part of this century probably is not going to happen in my lifetime. I would hope that cricket stays strong in the Caribbean because they produce some of the greatest players of all time and some of the best teams of all time. And I've always enjoyed the way they play cricket. So we want to see them strong.
They certainly produce a lot of T20 stars at the moment. So you're right about talent not being a problem. Mitchell Hall has also asked, where do you see Test cricket in 5 years?
Yeah, look, the death of Test cricket has been predicted for about 100 years, and certainly, 50 or 60 years of those, I recall plenty of times when people said Test cricket was going to die, and somehow it's managed to survive. One day cricket, I think, gave it a bit of a boost and a bit of a revival. T20 cricket can do the same sort of thing, but it is a big challenge to fit Test cricket into the program when there's so much T20 around the place. And it's a very expensive exercise to develop Test playing teams. I know how much Cricket Australia has spent over the years. And, England can and India can, but not many of the other countries can spend that sort of money to produce consistently performing Test match teams. New Zealand have been amazing how they've managed, and South Africa have managed with pretty low budgets to keep producing good players. If they can maintain, really strong domestic cricket, then there's a very good chance they can produce Test teams. But someone like Sri Lanka that doesn't have a particularly strong domestic first-class program really struggles. And I just think a lot of the countries don't have the tradition of Test cricket, like 140 years of Test cricket between England and Australia means a lot. Whereas, India and Pakistan have only been playing Test cricket for 70 years. Bangladesh have only been doing it for 20 years. There's not quite the same tradition to sort of hang on to. And therefore, I think Test cricket is under the pump and will continue to be under the pump. It will very much depend on the players and their willingness and their desire to play Test cricket. In the countries where that remains strong, I think Test cricket will hang on. But there are a few countries where maybe that there isn't that feeling, and maybe it won't happen so much. I think as T20 franchise cricket continues to grow, we're more likely to see a football, a soccer type situation where players play for a club or clubs for a big part of the year and then come together occasionally to play international cricket. I hope that doesn't happen, but that's sort of where it's heading at the moment. I think Test cricket, or cricket without Test cricket, won't really be cricket at all.
Yeah, it seems like the nations with the deep pockets will be able to keep playing, and then the rest will kind of be scurrying around the edges for what Test cricket they can get.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. It's it's a concern, but as I said, it's been written off before and has managed to survive. So I hope it continues to do so.
All right, last quick couple from our correspondent in Houston in America. His name's Chris. Yep. Well, he pointed out that you have cap number 1 in one-day international cricket for Australia. And I'm wondering, do you have a cap with the number 1 on it somewhere?
I don't have a one-day cap with the number 1 on it. I was just lucky that in alphabetical order, C, was obviously the highest or lowest, whichever way you look at the list, and G came before I. So that's the only reason I got to get cap number 1, because Ian got cap number 2. And he was captain at the time, so I don't quite know how that works out, but I'm happy to have number 1.
Well, excellent. And Chris asked, being in America, this is probably on his mind, how did baseball help you as a cricketer?
Yeah, they're very compatible games. I was very lucky that baseball in Australia was a winter sport in those days, and we were able to play both. And a lot of players of that era did play both, which meant that we were catching, throwing, hitting all year round. Fielding, I think it was very helpful to have had baseball in the background. Throwing, particularly, was very helpful to have baseball in the background. And just dealing with full tosses. Full tosses. Cricket season were a piece of cake because we'd spent the whole winter having full tosses thrown to us. So and we tended to hit the full toss with a cross bat, whereas cricket-bred players try and hit the full toss with a straight bat, and that doesn't work anywhere near as well as the cross bat, the perpendicular bat. You've only got to get it slightly on the low side, down the bottom of the bat, and it doesn't go anywhere. Whereas at least if you're hitting with the cross bat, even if you had a slight mishit, it wasn't quite as bad as with the perpendicular bat. But I love both games. I couldn't wait for the start of the cricket season at the end of the baseball, and vice versa at the end of the cricket season. We usually went straight from one to the other. There was hardly a break. But it didn't feel like you were playing sport around all year round because they were different games.
I love baseball too. It's a great sport. So I can imagine throwing across the diamond back then would be really good practice because there wasn't a lot of specialised fielding training.
No, there wasn't, and so we virtually had that specialised fielding training during as a winter and as a pre-season pretty much. So it was good.
Well, Greg, thank you so much for answering those questions for our listeners, and thank you so much for joining me on Cricket Unfiltered. Everybody listening, head to the Chappell Foundation website and support the Sports Stars Sleepout. And Greg, best of luck with all the fundraising over the next 12 months.
Thanks very much, Andrew, and thanks for your support. Nice to speak to you.
Thank you.